Memories are who we are. Without them, like, what are you left with? Watching somebody's memory slip away it's frightening.
We lose our sense of linear space that we've traveled, our personality, everything that kind of colors our soul.
But the soul is still there. I've had some experiences with memory, which I think is a little different than some of these like physical flow states that athletes talk about, because I'm actually trying to do something very heavy cognitively, but in this flow state, it almost feels like I'm not really trying or doing the thing that I'm trying to do. It did feel very out of body, like very third person, that I was just a bystander to this event that was happening in my mind. Had a direct line to this space where that information was, and it didn't feel like that space was in my brain.
Nelson Dellis, welcome to the Awakened podcast.
Hey man, thanks for having me.
It's great to have you here. I'd love to ask you, what has surprised you the most about how consciousness works?
Oh, wow. We're going straight there. That's a great question. I mean, I'd say that, especially from my background, which I guess we'll touch on in a second, but being so deep into memory and memory techniques and how my brain functions, and kind of how some spiritual kind of awakenings happened in my life in the last 5 years, I've realized how intertwined they are. I don't have all the answers yet, but that was one of the first things that I think drew me in to being more open to this awakening, let's say, is realizing how familiar a lot of these other practices that I've been doing as of late are to the process of memorizing and recalling information and accessing that data in your mind that you've stored there.
And you've learned how to master memory, and you've proven it. You're now the 6 times reigning champion in the US for being able to memorize a sequence of puzzles and challenges, right? That they put you and others to the test.
Yeah, all sorts of things. Memorizing playing cards, long strings of numbers, names and faces, poems, list of words, you name it. I started training my memory over a decade now, and have had the opportunity to compete in memory competitions since then, and have won 6. I've trained very hard and mastered this ability. It's not something I was born with either. It's something that I trained myself to do based on some techniques that have been written about for centuries and have been around for thousands of years.
Was there any spiritual traditions or these traditions that have been around for thousands of years, anything that's inspired the way you studied memory or came to understand how it works?
Well, my background, I grew up pretty much atheist, and didn't really have room for any of that, religion or spirituality. I just believed in myself. That was the only strong belief and faith that I had, was in my ability to work hard and to get the results from what this puts out. So yeah, and on top of that, my story and why I got into memory per se, because like I said, I didn't really have the skill. It wasn't really on my radar to train this at all. I didn't even know you could, until my grandmother started suffering from Alzheimer's disease, and she eventually passed away, and that kind of kick-started my really intense devotion to finding a way to improve my memory. And I'd heard about these techniques, these ancient techniques, and I was like, you know what do I got to lose? I don't want to end up the way she ended up. Maybe there's something I could be doing in my 20s now that will give me a stronger brain or a more powerful memory. I wasn't sure, but I dove into it with that in mind. It was never anything bigger than that. It was really just this fear in a way. And once I got started and realized that these techniques work and that my memory was like way better than I ever thought it could be, I was really hooked on this feeling of having a superpower in a way. But again, it was from that viewpoint of I am in this world and I put out what I put in, and this is the thing that I'm mastering, and that's all it is, you know?
Yeah, very one-to-one, like powerful belief that you can accomplish this, and being able to go from seeing someone who's gone through an Alzheimer's, which my grandmother actually went through the same slow decay. So being able to like see that, I could feel the challenge of like letting someone go slowly and watching that happen.
I was just going to say, to add to that, like watching somebody's memory slip away it's frightening to see that a brain can get to that point, but just deeper than that, like, you know, I feel like memories are who we are. They make up a large part of our experience in life, and without them, like, what are you left with? And obviously she was still my grandmother without those memories, you know? Physically, you know, it's her. Mentally, even and personality wise, yes, it shifts a little bit, especially near the end when she was very gone. But there's this element of her being her still, but there's also something completely missing about her at the same time. It's very weird to watch and fascinating and all at the same time.
Yeah. So without memories, we really lose ourselves. We lose our sense of linear space that we've traveled, our personality, the triumphs, the losses, the failures that we've had, everything that kind of colors our soul in a way.
Yeah. But the soul was still there, you know, I think now, at least. I maybe wouldn't have said that back then, but yeah, I like the way you put it, that it colors the soul. I think that's really a great way of putting it.
Yeah. So then it's like, Dole, what do you think then when you tie back to consciousness and then your present day understanding through the experiences that you've had, how do you access memory?
Yeah. So I've had some experiences just with memorizing things where, and this isn't that uncommon in a field of sport that a person might do, where you access this kind of flow state, right? And it's like, where does that come from? Where you suddenly can't miss, or you just like are so on point and dialed in, and it just kind of happens. There's been some studies and people writing about like how you can kind of access this more, but I still think it's a bit of an enigma. And I've had some experiences with memory in that state, which I think is a little different than some of these like physical flow states that athletes talk about, because I'm actually trying to do something very heavy cognitively, but in this flow state, it almost feels like I'm not really trying or doing the thing that I'm trying to do, if that makes any sense. So to give you a more concrete example, I'll always go back to this example, is when memorizing a deck of cards is one of the events at the championship, and we literally have to look through a 52 card deck that's shuffled random as fast as possible, and then be able to recall it perfectly. And the records now, it used to be under a minute. That's looking at the cards. Then it used to get cut down. It was in the 30-second range, and then somebody hit the 20-second range, and now it's like sub 10. It's crazy. I never got there, but sub 30, I hit. I was always in the 30-40 range, which was very fast for me, 30 seconds to 40 seconds. But there was one time I hit 29.84 seconds. And it was the best score I've ever personally done in training. And I remember that attempt because I remember going through the cards, hit the timer that I had, and I was like, I really don't feel like I memorized it. Like, I just looked at it and it's there. I knew it was there. It was almost as if I had a direct line to this space where that information was. And it didn't feel like it was that. I didn't feel like that space was in my brain, if we want to say that, right? And I've had many experiences like that since and along my journey, but I never really gave it much thought other than like, whoa, I'm just so dialed in. I just got it. But the more I have these experiences with consciousness, I feel like I don't necessarily know if when we recall memories and information like that it's necessarily always or at all stored in the brain, and that our brain might just be a receiver or some kind of read-write head. like something that records, like a cassette, right? That can record the sound that's coming in or play it out, right? This is all anecdotal, right? I've never, there's a couple researchers that are actually looking into stuff like this, but it's a really hard thing to actually test empirically and to make sure that this is actually what it is. But that's the impression that I've felt, and through other experiences that we can maybe dive into eventually, exploring consciousness and these different altered states of consciousness. Like I've been able to access other information that transcends time and space as well. So, and it's similar. This is what I was going back to. Like what shocked me the most is that those experiences felt a lot like what I was doing when I was memorizing these high functioning states,
And you're in a flow state like an athlete is when you're playing above yourself. You're in a integrated whole, you have this integration of your whole body system, and you're almost like playing on another dimension that's like above our just physical world, where you're breathing across like a new system, or you're tapping into like this level above. Am I resonating? Like, is there quality there that you're experiencing? And so in mental memory, the rooms, I know you talk about something called the memory palace. And when you think about consciousness and places that you can move into with your awareness, like out of body experiences, like lucid dreaming, like just natural dreaming that we all have in common every night. You've described that you've experienced a flow state in these like mental compartments. And so is it just rapidly firing? Do you feel like do you have a breath as you're moving through these, or is there more that you can share of like how it feels to be in that state, or what you do to access it?
Yeah. When that happened at that particular time, I don't know, because I couldn't really replicate it on command. It was just something I noticed and thought it was very strange. And usually those kind of moments that happen in other in other moments, that wasn't the only time. It was always kind of similar and sudden, and I wasn't quite sure what put me there. But another way I can kind of describe it is it did feel very out of body, like very third person, that I was just a bystander to this event that was happening in my mind. And of course I train a lot. So there is this automation to my process, right? That's so ingrained. Like I know what to do. My brain knows what to do. Yes, the cards are shuffled. So it's effectively a new deck of cards every time I do this exercise. But it doesn't matter. I know what all the combinations could present themselves to in my mind. And I, like you mentioned, a memory palace, I know where to go. So that part is automatic, which is kind of weird to say because I don't know what I'm going to get when I see a deck of cards. It is randomly shuffled. And to have that uncertainty while also trying to imagine all that stuff in a memory palace, it seems like a very conscious activity. Like I need to be present there doing this. And I wasn't. And that's why I came out of it. And I was like, I really didn't feel like I played a part in what just happened now. And at the same time, I feel like that information, the order of the cards, is all there for me, and it was flawless, and that feeling is, like you said, I felt like I was in a different, like me, Nelson, was like in a different space watching Earth Nelson do this automatic task, It's hard to put in words sometimes. I don't know if I did a good job there.
Yeah. Is this like a grandiose version? Do you feel ever like there's like what you just described almost sounds like there's a greater entity that you represent, like a cosmic or a planetary or something that just feels larger than the self, encapsulated in our physical body and tracking and walking around with us and experiencing the memories of moment to moment, day to day experiences, that there's an overarching larger like oversoul? Is that what you kind of connected to, or had some glimpse of access that had more power or more information available?
I think so. I really think so. I wouldn't have thought it then, but I don't know if you had read about this, about what I've done recently. You listened to some of my interviews on other podcasts, but I went to the Monroe Institute last summer, and we did a bit of work with out of body attempts and other things, accessing higher levels of consciousness, and some of those experiences were what I felt, where I was connecting to some greater, higher version of myself, or potentially some other entities that oversee me or us, and were able to kind of allow me to access some information in a different way, in a more streamlined way than normal,
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
For listeners, can you help us? What is the Monroe Institute?
Yes, a beautiful place in the middle of Virginia, in the hills, the Blue Mountains there, tucked away. It's such a serene spot, but it's basically a retreat, and they have different programs, but their main one is called the Gateway Experience. This was something that a gentleman named Robert Monroe came up with. He was a broadcaster, producer for NBC, very technical and savvy with sound engineer. And he started having spontaneous out-of-body experiences and wrote a few books about it that became quite big, Journeys Out of the Body, and some sequels there. And he kind of worked on this proprietary sound design that helped him and now others kind of access these states easier. And some of these states being where you might go out of body, not necessarily. I'd say that the retreat itself isn't all about out of body experiences. That's what I thought it was going to be. And it actually was just a small, tiny part of it. There were so many things that were bigger than that. It was really all about learning that we are more than our physical bodies. And I never really grasped that concept. I maybe thought about it and thought, yeah, okay, sure. But I experienced it in many ways. So as did the other people at this retreat. I came away from that thing, it's really not the kind of thing I would have ever found myself doing, but circumstances and synchronicities got me there. And I came out of it honestly believing that I think every human being should do something like that, because it changed my life and opened me up to so many new thoughts and experiences and knowledge about myself and what this all is,
Does it give you access to the idea of a God or creator or divine spirit? Does something like that reveal itself, or do you make connections, or is there still that's not in the realm that you touch or convincing enough?
You can. I'm not going to say that you go there, you see God. I think you can, or you might meet the thing I think you see the thing that you need to see, whatever that means. And I've never needed a God. That was never part of my upbringing and my belief system, my worldview. So I didn't necessarily see a God. And I don't necessarily believe that is the case, that there is a God. But I definitely encountered some things that were greater than myself. I wouldn't call it a God. I'd call it this universal consciousness, and entities that kind of negotiate between these different parts of what the universe and all of this is. And I think they're part of the greater existence of beings that are beyond this physical thing that we experience. I do believe that there's something more than this. Actually, I not to preach, but I know personally, and I think that's all that matters for me, at least, I know that there's more. That's what I walked away with. Do I know all the details? Absolutely not. But there is a level of knowing that is really nice for what I was looking for, that I now have because of that experience.
Is there any specific experiences or memories that came from that you'd be willing to share?
Sure. Yeah. It started, it's a week long program. And when I got there, I immediately wanted to leave. um, I was so uncomfortable because, I got there a little late. Everybody had kind of been there for maybe a few hours and they were already like lounging around, meeting each other. I could hear the conversations between people, and the stuff people were saying was like very out there. And I was like, I don't know if this is for me. I went to my little room and I was just kind of like, do I bail? And I was like, no, I came here, to do this. I'm going to do this as best I can. And slowly I started to realize like everything these people are talking about is exactly the stuff that I love to talk about. I'm not familiar, or not, it's not common that I am in a room full of people that want to talk about it. I think that was what was weird for me. And I was a bit scared by it at first, but then I was like, what am I talking about? These are my people. And anyways, so one of the first exercises, I think it was on the next day, I connected with this one person more than other people off the bat. And I said to her, listen, this one, because what happens at these retreats is we talk a little bit and we learn about these different ways to kind of basically meditate with the sound design that Monroe designed. And we go into our little cubicles, these little check units, they call them, where it's like blacked out shades. You can put blindfolds on, and you have the headphones that play these binaural beats essentially. And we try to kind of go to this next level of consciousness. And then we come out, we do some other exercises, and we go even deeper. But this first level that we were trying to get to, they were like, have a goal, right? Maybe you want to try to go out of body. Maybe you want to, see a higher version of yourself, or have a question, ask yourself this and see if you get an answer. And I was like, typical me, because I come from like a science background. I studied physics and math. I need like concrete evidence, of anything weird going on. So I said to this other person, I was like, okay, go to your room. She was in a different room on a different floor. And I said, write down a 4-digit number. And I'm going to try to float out of my body and go over there and see it. And, if we can verify that I can tell you the number, then maybe there's something to it, right? Kind of half-heartedly joking a little bit and not really serious, but I'm there for a week to do this weird stuff. Why not? And I think it was like me trying to test the universe. Like, this is a little bullshit, right? None of this is real. And believe it or not, in that session, I felt like I went to her room. I saw her room. There were things that I described to her later. I hadn't been to that part of the building yet, or even seen that part of, or even her room. And she confirmed that she showed me, but I saw the desk where she had written this thing. I saw the sheet of paper that it was on. And while I didn't get it completely the 4 digits, I saw the 173. And then I couldn't see clearly. It wasn't crisp. It was out of focus, the last digit. And I had almost this angular view, which I think it was like, when you like rack a camera lens in focus, some things may stay in focus while other parts are out of focus. It was kind of like that. So I didn't quite get the last digit, but I remember when she came down the stairs and I had my number written down, she had hers, and we showed it. I almost froze because I knew I had seen it. Like, it wasn't like well, maybe I'm going to guess and that's right, and I have a feeling it's that number. No, I fucking saw it. I was there, and it's as if, you were showing me a number right now. Like, that's real to me. I would see that number and tell you what it is, It was almost like that. And that experience, I think it was, I haven't had an experience like that where I was able to like just see a number in somebody's room. I've tried it again. I've never had success again, but I think the universe let me have that experience because it was a way of saying, hey, there's something to this space. Here's a little proof, a little taste of success. Now go and stop the, like questioning so hard like that, and just like succumb to it. Allow this experience to happen. And from then on, I was all in. And, I had other experiences where I met with loved ones that had passed away, and they had messages for me, which I was able to confirm with another family member, in ways that could never have been just chance. I even met another part of myself that felt like some kind of alien entity that was watching over me. I don't know if it's alien, but maybe just like a higher version of myself. There's lots of little stories. I had this whole notebook filled with some of these experiences. There's almost too many to count, but just a wild ride.
Yeah, when you go to visualize and you're meditating with the binaural beats on, you're in level 1. Are you actually dipping into your astral or out of body type of experience? Or are you just like in your memory practice visualizing what the room would look like? And that clarity got so real. Which one feel like more what happened? Did you just visualize, or was there an actual moving into that environment?
Right. I wasn't sure. Because when I went into my check unit to try this, I remember we close our eyes, the beats go on, and I'm like, I'm trying, right, to leave my body and float over whatever that experience is like. And it wasn't happening, maybe 30, 40 minutes into the session. And I was just like, you know what? I'm just going to like not try and just let whatever wash over me. And that's when things started to happen. I got, in the darkness of my eyes being closed, suddenly, and I explained this to Chris when I was telling him about this on this podcast, that it felt like in the darkness, like an opening of light kind of appeared. And I saw like what looked like a wall texture, and then it closed back up again. And then it opened up again, and I saw kind of the corner of like an opening to what ended up being like where these check units are. It's like a little hole in the wall, and you get in and the bed's there. And I was like, oh wait, this looks like potentially one of these rooms, like the corner there. It's not quite where the desk would be, but I'm sure the desk is next to it. It closed up again, and then it opened up once more, and there was the desk. And it wasn't like I could look around and see everything. It was really like I got this like spotlight in the darkness on whatever I was looking at. So I did wonder, like, it didn't really feel like I floated out of my body to get there. So I don't know if it was necessarily an out of body experience, but also I don't know if that term is so clearly defined, where you have to fly out of your body and remember getting there and feeling like you're actually there. All I know is I saw it. So maybe I actually remote viewed it. I don't know.
What's the difference between the visualizing, like when you try to manifest, or the practice of like seeing success in your life and trying to move into that moment, versus how you practice memory and you've learned to harness your memory to be able to access memorizing a deck of cards, memorizing things that happen in your day? How as we're talking, are there things that I can do to memorize our conversation? There's visualizing, there's memorizing, and then there's the like moving into consciously, fully into some space where then your local consciousness moves in. Like, how do those relate and differentiate?
Yeah. That's a great question, man. And the more and more I get deeper into this stuff, the blurrier the lines are, because if we talk about what I've been doing with my memory for over 10, 12 years, I look at information and I visualize it as an image of something. So I create something in my mind to represent this thing, and then pair that with some method to store the information. And that's where a memory palace comes in. So for those that don't know what that is, I basically think of a space, a physical place in my mind that I know very well. It could be like my house or my former apartment or my favorite hotel when I travel, to New York City or something like that. And I mentally travel through this space, imagining the images interacting with the environment as I do a path through the space. And the idea is that the pathway that I choose is going to preserve the information organization of that information. So I can remember the order of a list just by walking through my house, which I've done a million times. But anyways, I'm going to these places in a way. And I've always thought about it as like, oh yeah, I'm just visualizing my house, starting at my front door, and then I walk to the next one and so on. And there's definitely a feeling like, it's not like I'm actually there. I'm mentally visualizing myself there, right?
And in first person. So you're not in this body anymore. You're almost trying to push as much attention and willpower to create, to go into a memory and to almost stand in it as if you are there.
Yeah. Well, listen, the more you can make it feel like this is real, that you're actually there, which you aren't, but what I mean by that is, if you can feel the door of your front door, or imagine the texture of the wood, and maybe even the breeze from the outside, like going through your hair, and the sounds you might hear, all those little details, those sensory details, what you're trying to do ultimately is to make it feel as real as possible, as best as you can with your imagination, so that it becomes as memorable as possible. And then, you continue walking through this space until you're done. And then when you recall it, you just walk back through it in your mind, and hopefully those images are still there.
And what are those images? What are the options? Like if you're trying to memorize things, a list to do, moments in your day that were important, lessons, a person's name, right? What's the image that you're seeing in your house on your front door or inside your room on your bed?
Yeah. So it's not a direct image of the thing that you're memorizing. Like if you have a name like Steve, it's not like I'm picturing the letters STEVE on my door.
Okay.
That's not memorable. It's just symbols, right? So when you come up with an image for whatever you're trying to memorize, and it can vary. I mean, sometimes if I hear the word Steve, I might know a Steve that maybe my dad's name is Steve, it's not, but you may know somebody so close that when somebody says that name, you instantly see a picture in your mind of that person. You have an association, right, to something. So often what we'll do is, if something already has an association, immediately you visualize that. Or maybe it sounds like something else, or it reads like something else, but it still comes to you as like, oh, that reminds me of so-and-so. That could be a great image to use. In other cases, we have to create a system, because maybe an image isn't so obvious. Like if I have a string of numbers, that might not elicit any kind of imagery in my mind, because it's just a bunch of math symbols.
It may be
right?
difficult to see. I find visualizing letters or numbers or very specific small little details would be very difficult, or it's difficult for my imagination in visualizing.
No, it is. And they blend together, because there's only, like think of numbers, there's really only 10 digits. There are only 10 digits. So it's not that much options, right? So for a long number, there's going to be a lot of repeats. It's confusing. It's all the same. So instead, we try to turn them into pictures, mental pictures of things that our brain already knows and is interested in. So, with a number, memory athletes come up with systems where we can translate these numbers into preset images. For example, I have, for every 3-digit number, I have a person associated with it. So instead of seeing the number, I see a person. 065, it's my mom. And when I see that number, it feels like it's her. So I don't necessarily have to memorize 065 whenever I see that in a string of digits.
So different strings mean different strings are different images. So you have an image for 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up to 9 and 0. And then combinations.
All the way up to 999.
You have images up to 999?
Yeah, 1,000 images. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's
our brain can store that.
Yeah. Oh, sure. Even more, way more. But to master it, to be able to do it quickly, that takes a lot of time. And I spent a lot of hours many years ago doing that. But the point being is, we're always trying to find ways to translate the difficult, complicated things that are meaningless in our life, like to our brains, like boring and meaningless, a number is meaningless, effectively, into things that are meaningful and that trick our brain into wanting to remember because they're so visual.
Wow. That is really cool. I had no idea that that's a part of your system, and that you have so many images, unique images, and that you roll through them. And as you're practicing these over and over again, you already mentioned a very powerful word, interest, that you're interested in. So these images, which are really like vessels, they're like energy sources that you're familiar with. And then you're stringing together energy sources rapidly when you're trying to recall. Do you do this as a practice throughout your day after significant moments that you want to memorize, or at the end of your day, like when you go to sleep? Do you have like a moment where you try to imagify what happened that day?
Yeah, a bit of that. But even in my actual day, when I'm perceiving the world around me, because I've trained this so much, I just think that way. Like everything I take in colorful imagery, and I know I'm seeing the thing and it's colorful in itself, but so many images, like even subconsciously, I don't even really pay attention to everything because I'm not always trying to memorize everything, but it comes in such a memorable way. It's hard not for me to think that way. And I'm not saying I remember everything that happens to me, but I definitely know how to take a moment in so that I can remember it better. And I do at the end of the day and at the end of the week, do reflect back on my day and or my week, trying to pinpoint some of these memorable moments and try to relive them and revisit them. Because another thing about our brain is it likes to forget. That's just what it's designed to do, more than it remembers. And if you want to remember something, you have to review it. That's just the way your brain decides that something's important. This isn't always the case, as I started this conversation with saying that that memory is maybe not in here. And you can hear about some stories where people are able to access a memory they don't even know was even in their brain anymore, right? So I don't know how that works, but I'm saying that to have the little bit that we do know about what happens here is that if you think about a memory, the more you think about it, the longer it'll stay. And maybe a way to explain that even is all you're really reviewing or strengthening is this connection to where the memory lives, right? And the more you do that, the easier it is for your brain to kind of get to that track. Let's say if we're going to go to that read write head space, like there's track number 1, track number 2. I know the button to get to it, right? Because I've played it so many times, versus the one that's, on the B side of that vinyl, right? Like I can't get to it because I've never flipped over the record. Yeah.
Yeah. And when you're doing that recall, are you just pressing the same image combination that you implanted to memorize that? Or are you trying every single time you revisit to add more pairs or to create more synaptic connections? Is it just like recall one and that's enough just to refresh and strengthen your interest? Or do you have to tie them and string them together with more to continue to propagate?
Are you talking about like life memories, or when I'm say memorizing a string of numbers?
Life memories, the important ones that you were just kind of talking about, like things that you want to revisit because you want to store them in you and to make them a part of you.
It's, obviously things are happening to us every day. It's hard to be able to review all of them all the time equally, right? To fortify all of them in a way that would, if I was studying something for an exam, I'd have more control over what I could study and how often I review it. With life memories, you may have a false sense of, hey, this memory was so good, like there's no way I'm going to forget it. Maybe I don't need to think about it so much because it's just so unforgettable. And then you forget that one, right? Or it's harder to remember or something. It's hard to get a sense of that with our own life memories. So even my practice of thinking about a particular memory from a day or for things that happen in the week, I miss some and I don't quite get everything, but I don't worry about it. I just think the practice of doing that actually makes a lot more around those ones, not even the ones that you're necessarily reviewing. I think it just makes in general your experience and memory of those experiences in general more memorable to you. And I feel like you're training your mind to be able to access that information smoother, more frequently, easier.
Are there memories that stand out that really represent who you are? Like when you mentioned in the very beginning, our personality, we really are our memories. And so our best memories are vibrant when we performed at our absolute best, our greatest accomplishments, the like moments that we almost want to store in us so that we can, so we know that this is who we are, rather than easily forget and not be able to recall how great we are. Maybe when we're approaching the next challenge or feeling down on ourselves or going through a slump, right? Like maybe there's listeners that are like wondering how to strengthen your identity with this like memory practice. What would you advise?
Oh yeah. I used to ask this question a lot in my early 30s with groups of friends, because it would really bring out amazing things in people. And it's a great exercise in general. And sometimes it's actually hard to do, but I think it gets people thinking along those lines, which is to think of the three, doesn't have to be three, but it's a good number, the three happiest moments in your life, right? Very simple question. And you're like, oh, I can think of that. That's not too hard. And you pause for a second and you're like, well, shit, what does that actually mean? Like, it wasn't when I got my PS5 or, got that nice car. It's usually never that. And then you start to realize that it's these very kind of like seemingly insignificant moments without context, but I think what it boils down to is moments that you were the most present, right? Where nothing else truly mattered other than you being there doing this thing or feeling this thing. And I remember back then, a lot of that has happened since I used to answer that question, but one of them that would always come to mind was, I'm a mountaineer and I've climbed some pretty significant mountains and failed on some significant mountains as well. But one in particular, I climbed or attempted to climb Everest in 2013 from the Tibetan side. So you can climb it from Nepal or Tibet. And I've been to that region and tried the mountain numerous times, but that year in particular, I remember coming off the mountain. We were driving back from base camp in China. And, at one point we crossed the border back into Nepal and we're in this bus. The windows are down. I've been at 17,000 feet plus for 6 weeks at that point. And so we're getting lower and lower into like the jungle, kind of rainforest, temperature and climate. And the air is just so thick and warm. And it's like I'm in a soup of air. I've been craving this for so long. And, I'm with my buddies that I just did this amazing adventure with, and I got a beer in my hand, and I remember thinking and looking out the window and seeing all this color. Finally, we've been in the snow for months, for a couple months. And I was just like, I'm nowhere else. I'm right here. This is the coolest thing I've ever done. The most present I've ever felt. This is like what I'm so happy, right? And this is all I want to do in my life is feel this way. And, if I were to put it into what you were asking, like how, if you feel lost or you're not sure about your identity, like that was Nelson right there. And I can't even put into words like what that actually means, but I know what that means. And I can always remember that and say, if I'm kind of just straying away from my goals in life, it's like, oh, that's where I want to be. And that's who I am deep down, and if I stray away from that, like that should guide me back. Yeah, I had two at the time. I would never define my third happiest one because I was like, I got to leave one open for the future, but I guess you can always rewrite them. I've definitely had other moments since having my kids, and those I think have probably taken over, just because they're so special. But I really think it's a fun exercise to do at a dinner table with friends. And I think you can learn a lot about your friends and yourself just by asking that simple question.
Yeah, I love that. Presence, you mentioned. How do you understand presence, You've also meditated. You've had these out of body experiences. What does it mean to be present in our day to day?
I think it's at this point, I'd say it's you being closer to that source, whatever that is. And to me, the source is kind of like this soup of consciousness that is, I think, the most fundamental thing in the world. And each of us humans is just an offshoot of a droplet of that consciousness. And so when you're, I think, the most present or in that flow state, I think there's a lot of similarity to these kinds of situations, is you're in some in-between dimension there where obviously you're not dead back into the fold of that consciousness, but I think you're living above this realm, which is so material. And I think going back to what we did at the Monroe Institute, like, I don't think there's just one like in between level. I think there's multiple levels that you can access, both dead and alive. And obviously I'd like to experience those alive right now. But yeah, I think that's what being present is. That's not a great answer, just because it's like, well, how do you access that? Well, I sometimes it's just as simple as like looking around you and taking in what's really there and focusing in on what's actually happening in the moment. But I also think like meditating and being open to what could be more or greater than yourself, and experiencing that a lot and having a knowing can also get you there as well.
What do you experience when you meditate?
Yeah, well, so I didn't used to meditate at all. I had dabbled in it. It just wasn't for me. I was like, how can you just sit here and focus on your breath? This is like so boring. Granted, I knew that was a terrible answer, because it's like, well, maybe I should meditate because I said that, or because I think that. But I always said, my meditation is when I sit down and I memorize. Okay, I think it was a bit of a cop out, but there's some pieces to that I think that were actually true, because I'd be sitting down only focused on this one thing, not my breath, but advancing through a set of data and not straying from that thought of encoding these things and placing them in this place that I'm in my mind.
When you say that, is that your image review? Are you doing like an image review when you say that?
Yeah. So let's say I'm memorizing numbers. I have a timer of 5 minutes. I look at the numbers and I'm looking at the digits line by line, and they're coming off the page into my brain as people doing things in these actions, and I'm placing them in my memory palace, right? So I'm here looking at this, but I'm mentally, mapping that to a space that I'm in, quote unquote. And if I take a second to be like, whoa, I'm here memorizing at this table, thinking about this, like or even like, oh, what's that noise I just heard in the hallway? Suddenly I'm wasting, precious seconds that could be spent encoding more digits and getting a better score. So, and that would happen a lot, because like I think about a lot of things when I do anything. So having to just focus on this one thing for the sake of being better at memorizing, I have to train myself to be better at that. So I'd always bring it back and try to focus on this one thing. So in that sense, it felt like what a lot of people would say meditating is about. But then going to the Monroe Institute, it was kind of funny because, we'd go into these check units and we'd meditate. Nobody really called it that, and nobody was really telling me to focus on my breath, which I've always thought is like, you basically, to meditate, you don't want to think about anything. And if you do, go back to this one thing and try to not think about anything. That never really resonated with me. But here, they didn't say any of that. It was just like, whatever comes to your mind, just experience it, And that was better to me. That created so many experiences for me as well. So that's really what I do. If that's the wrong way to do it, so be it. But, if I go and lay on my couch and meditate for 45 minutes, I'm not trying to fall asleep. and that may happen sometimes if I'm tired, but I'm really just trying to see what comes to my mind and where that leads to. And of course, I daydream, I visualize, but then some images come to mind that feel realer than real. And sometimes, I feel like I am traveling somewhere else and that this is an actual experience that I'm having and it's not just an imagination. So yeah, that's my
When
experience
does
with meditation.
visualizing turn into like
That.
what's that the barrier there where you do you think then when you visualize you're actually consciously there to some degree but just not fully enough because it's not pure texture and your consciousness hasn't fully merged with that spatial reality?
Yeah, I think there's a sliding scale there. I think to some extent, yes. Every time I go to a memory palace and visualize, I'm there in a way. It is some physical space that my mind is traveling through, and it does feel. No, I'm not going to say real, but for what I'm doing, that feels real. But then, like I said, yeah, there have been some experiences where I actually feel like I'm in this place, and maybe it's not the real place that I'm there in, but it's maybe some realm where this place also exists in some form. And so to find the difference, it's a bit blurry, but I would say that in some of the more intense experiences where I feel like I went somewhere or really was experiencing something more real, that there was just this base knowing rather than this feeling of creating and imagining it. Yeah. I don't know how else to put that, but it's
Do you think
more
there's a
of
degree of certainty?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Definitely. Now, could that doesn't mean that I'm everything that I know is right, but I think for experiences like that, it's really for me and what I want to experience or hope that I'm experiencing. So if it feels real, then why can't it be? Like if it doesn't hurt anybody else, if it's just for what I get out of it, and if I'm getting something out of it, then why isn't that real? I don't know.
Just like when we remember some of those happiest moments that we know we were there, if you can have a textual experience beyond this or, wake up in your dream, when you look back at your memories and you recount them, if you had that experience fully and you were present and you were there, but you're being consciously aware in these other spaces, what does that mean to what we are, to what consciousness is, and what we're doing here?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny because sometimes I've dabbled a little bit in psychedelics in the past year. And one of the common things you hear is when these people have these experiences, they'll come out and say, that felt realer than real, right? The realest thing I've ever experienced. Like, what does that mean, right? Granted, your mind is altered when in that state. So can it be fully trusted? Maybe it should be trusted more than your non-affected state. I don't know. I think these are the big questions that I think are for philosophers, not for me. But it's really interesting to just ponder about and question what is true to you, and this experience that we're having in life, and discovering that there are different states of being, and where those all play into the human experience.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me that this reality is so easy to have, right? We just wake up and here we are and whatnot, right? But then to meditate and get to these other like secret levels, right? Or take a drug and get there maybe a little quicker. There's more effort to get there, which is curious. It's like, why are we so trapped down here when there's those to explore, right? I don't know. I don't know why we're given the key to this reality so easily, and those ones are a little tougher to get,
Yeah, it's a really important question to ponder. There's so much out there beyond us. When you think back over your life and your journey, what secrets have you discovered that made the biggest impact on you?
Oof. Um, yeah, I mean, going back to kind of what my life and career has been all about related to this memory is just treasuring the moments that you have that are special and you realize that are going to be the culmination of, again, this earthly experience. But for who I am in this conscious experience that I have for the, you know, hopefully 90 or so years that I will be here, like I want to make the most of those. And um, I want to relive them too. So I try to make the most out of them. I try to make any experience I have, with my kids or when I get an opportunity to go climb a mountain or share, something with a friend or my wife or loved one. It's something that I really try to put every ounce of my soul into because I want to remember that. And yeah, I think I didn't quite realize that when I first started this memory journey, but now having been hit with a few more spiritual experiences, that really takes to heart a little more how I cherish all the little moments, and I try not to shy away from experiences. I try to dive into them full on and make them the most memorable things I possibly can.
That's awesome. What's next for you on your journey? That more spiritual? Are you inspired to continue this spiritual path and discover more? Or are there other retreats maybe coming up that you're looking to attend?
Yeah, it's always come in kind of like these waves. I first really the big paradigm shift in my worldview happened in 2021 when I was pulled into this remote viewing project and I had no idea what I was doing or what it was, and I even scoffed at it so many times, but I did it anyways, and it just changed everything for a few months, and then I stopped doing it for a number of reasons, and then I kind of like just pulled back. It was like too much for me. It was like destroying the way everything I had thought. Right, so I was just like, no, this isn't. No, let's not go there. And then a few months passed and I kind of started reading a few more books about it and got pulled back in. And there's been this pull and push, with myself. And, last year was extremely transformative spiritually. And I feel like this start of this year has been a little bit of a pullback. Not that I don't believe it or put down anything that I experienced. No, it's just that I'm not like aggressively going for it, kind of just like pulling back. And then I know that I have a sense that I'll be pulled in with some kind of pull again coming soon. I feel like there's going to be a shift again coming. I just have a sense of that. And I'm not in any rush. I feel like it's a long discovery period for me. It's a journey for me. So I've been writing about and teaching memory techniques for about 15 years now. And I have a new book coming out next spring, and it's kind of like me kind of broadening out from memory and even talking about some of these bigger concepts. So I feel like that's going to be tied heavily into kind of the next phase of what I do in my space, which, like I said, has always been just memory. But me starting to kind of tap outside of that and maybe help others kind of get there as well.
That's exciting. I think with everything you've experienced, you're probably well positioned to like be a resource and help teach people or give them like a professional opinion in a way, or like some type of roadmap of what it looks like, what your scientific takeaways have been, and some unbiased feedback of how they can best approach it.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, from someone who's kind of made their life around training or trying to, capture these things in the mind that are sometimes so difficult to really feel like you have control of. Memory is a great example. Yeah, I definitely think that I have something to share with many others about the mind and how to tap into some of these resources that we have and don't always think we have or know how to use.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you'd love to leave viewers? Any other tip or something that comes to mind, or if you want to summarize like the best takeaway from this conversation?
Yeah. In terms of memory, try to look at everything that is coming at you in terms of how can I make this a picture in my mind? Because our brain will remember a picture better than the actual information that it is. And then how can I store it? How can I organize it in a way such that the recall of it will be easier to get? So usually when people try to remember things, they just read it over and over or listen to it over and over again, and hopefully it's in the brain, right? But that's hit or miss. You may recall it, you may not. And often the problem is with memory is it's not that you don't remember, it's because you just can't recall it. And there's a subtle difference there. It's not being able to recall something implies that maybe it's, or it probably is in your brain, you just can't find it, right? And that's an organizational problem. So finding a way to structure or organize these pictures, Memory Palace is a great way to do that, is super important to having a better memory. So just even having that thought in your mind that, oh shoot, I can work on my memory, and there are some techniques for that. I really hope your listeners remember that because that can be the difference and change somebody's life. Just being aware that your memory abilities can be transformed. Anybody's, even if you think you have a bad memory.
And so even while they're listening, it's like, try to imagine your childhood home, and what image would you recommend to try to memorize? Maybe a big takeaway, maybe a moment that they heard. Like, what should they do to try to memorize this real time?
Yeah, well, that's a bit different than like very concrete items, say like grocery items or a number or a name. You're trying to encapsulate maybe something that I said, and remember that. But I think the best way to go about something like that is, I can't really speak to what resonated with, say, a particular listener. They're going to gravitate to something that I said, a little nugget, or maybe something you said, or some interaction we had, and be like, oh shit, that moved the needle for me, or that was important to me. So whatever that was, if you target that, or while you're experiencing this podcast, you felt something and something said to you that was important, take what I said, re-listen to it, and really try to just visualize it. And what I mean by that is, play it in your mind as if it's a movie, the things that we're saying, So if I'm saying, I went to the Monroe Institute, it was in the Blue Mountains in Virginia, like actually start to picture that in your mind, right? Even if you've never even been there, just try to imagine it, the rolling hills, what it would be like if you're out there. It was summer, so it was kind of hot. And I mentioned how it was in this quaint kind of retreat center. You don't know what it looks like, but try to imagine what that might mean to you, something quaint, right? So trying to have it unfold in like a movie sense is a great start to making this thing memorable. And knowing also that review plays a part of this. So, with podcasts, there's so much shit that's said in a podcast. I don't think it's shameful to write something down, or whenever something's important, I name drop or talk about this, make a note of it, and then later try to actually visualize it. And I don't want to dive into more memory techniques, but and even a memory palace to start just now. I maybe didn't explain it too deeply enough so that you could instantly use it, but I think just focusing on the visualizing part will get your listeners pretty far.
And to make a movie of it, and just pick any type of image that comes to mind with a statement that you pulled out from this conversation or from a book. Try to visualize it as a movie, or maybe in your home. Maybe make it a person, them acting in a certain way, and just try to just connect
all those
that.
Little bits. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Interesting.
And I just say play it as a movie just because that is a very visual experience. If you can make it even more than that, like a 3D experience, where you're actually there, that's even better than a movie. But
Awesome.
Yeah.
Very cool, man. Nelson Dellis, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Dude, yeah, thanks for having me. Pleasure talking about this stuff. I love it.
Absolutely. Thank you.